It's February 23rd, 1964, Daytona Beach, Florida. The grandstands are shaking. The air smells like burnt rubber and racing fuel. 42 stock cars scream down the straight at over 180 miles per hour. The roar is deafening. Fans press against the fences, feeling the vibration in their chests. And somewhere in that thunder of engines, something new is lurking, something terrifying, something that would change American racing forever. Because under the hood of several Chrysler cars sits an engine that most teams barely understand yet. An engine so powerful, so brutally efficient that Chevrolet engineers watching from the sidelines reportedly looked at each other and said the same thing. Holy hell, what is that? They had no idea what they were witnessing, but they knew something was very, very wrong. What happened next didn't just change NASCAR, it forced one of America's biggest automakers into full-blown panic mode. But here's the part most people don't know. The legendary 426 Hemi wasn't originally built to dominate NASCAR. It was created out of desperation after Chrysler suffered one of the most humiliating defeats in racing history. And the solution they came up with? It was so powerful that NASCAR almost banned it immediately. They weren't wrong to be scared. To understand why the Hemi scared Chevrolet that badly, we have to go back just a couple of years. The early 1960s were a golden age for American stock car racing. NASCAR was exploding in popularity. Tracks across the South were packed with fans every weekend. Television was starting to take notice. And suddenly, winning on Sunday meant selling cars on Monday. The big three automakers, Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler, were locked in a brutal horsepower war. This wasn't just about trophies. This was about survival, about pride, about proving whose engineers were the best in the world. Winning races meant selling cars, and Chevrolet was on top. Their big block engines, like the 409 cubic inch V8, were dominating the tracks. The 409 had become legendary. Beach Boys even wrote a song about it. That's how famous this engine was. With a 4.31-inch bore and a 350-inch stroke, the 409 produced around 425 horsepower in race trim. It had massive torque and incredible reliability. The engine was robust, dependable, and fast enough to win races week after week. Drivers loved it. Teams trusted it. Chevrolet showrooms were packed with customers wanting that same power. And for Chrysler, it was a nightmare, because their current engines simply couldn't keep up. Race after race, Chrysler teams watched Chevrolet cars disappear into the distance. They tried everything. Better tuning, lighter cars, more experienced drivers. Nothing worked. The gap was too big. So Chrysler engineers did something bold, something desperate. They went digging through their own past. Back in the 1950s, Chrysler had experimented with a strange type of engine design called hemispherical combustion chambers. Instead of flat cylinder heads like most engines, the combustion chambers were shaped like half a sphere, a hemisphere. That shape allowed the valves to sit opposite each other at wide angles. The result? Bigger valves, better airflow, and far more efficient combustion. The flames spread evenly through the chamber. Every drop of fuel burned more completely. It was complicated, expensive, hard to build. The manufacturing costs were enormous. Assembly required specially trained technicians. But the potential power was enormous. If they could make it work, everything would change. So in 1963, Chrysler engineers led by Tom Hoover began developing a racing version based on their existing 426 cubic inch wedge engine block. Tom Hoover was obsessed with airflow. He spent months studying combustion chamber designs, running calculations, testing prototypes, and he believed the hemispherical design could unlock power that nobody else could match. But this new monster would be very different from anything Chrysler had built before. The engine kept the same displacement, 426 cubic inches, but everything else changed. The bore measured a massive 4.25 inches. The stroke came in at 3.75 inches. That gave the engine huge breathing capacity at high RPM. Then came the real magic. The hemispherical heads used gigantic valves, 2.25 inches for the intake and 1.94 inches for the exhaust. These were some of the largest valves ever fitted to a production-based engine. Airflow through those ports was incredible. Engineers measured numbers that seemed impossible. Paired with dual Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors and a 12.5:1 compression ratio, the race version of the engine produced around 550 horsepower. Let that number sink in, 550 horsepower in 1964, from a naturally aspirated V8 running on carburetors. Most engines in NASCAR at the time were barely breaking 450, and suddenly Chrysler had an engine making 100 horsepower more than the competition. 100 horsepower. That's not an advantage, that's annihilation. But there was a problem. Actually, several. The first prototypes were brutal, huge, heavy, temperamental. The hemispherical heads were massive. Each one weighed almost 70 pounds. Compare that to conventional heads that weighed half as much. The valve train was complex, using long rocker shafts and heavy components. At high RPM, the valve train sometimes floated. Push rods bent, valves bounced, and when something failed, it failed spectacularly. Engines exploded during testing. Pistons melted. Connecting rods snapped like twigs. One mechanic reportedly opened an engine after testing and said the bearings looked like charcoal briquettes. Another engineer described finding metal fragments everywhere inside the crankcase. The damage was catastrophic. But Chrysler didn't have time to be careful. Daytona 1964 was coming, and they needed a miracle. So the engineers kept refining the design, working through the night, running test after test, stronger valve springs, better lubrication, revised camshaft profiles. They experimented with different oil pump designs. They tested dozens of bearing combinations. They rebuilt engines over and over again. And slowly, the engine began to stabilize. Still dangerous, still wild. But now, incredibly fast. When the 426 Hemi debuted at the 1964 Daytona 500, most teams didn't realize what they were up against. They saw Chrysler cars. They expected Chrysler performance. They were wrong. That mistake cost them dearly. Richard Petty and other Chrysler drivers qualified near the front with shocking speeds. Petty's Plymouth recorded over 184 miles per hour during practice. That was nearly 10 mph faster than many rivals. 10 miles per hour. At those speeds, that gap is enormous. That's the difference between racing and watching everyone else get smaller in your mirror. But qualifying speed was just the beginning. Once the race started, the Hemi cars pulled away like they were on another planet. The power was overwhelming. The massive hemispherical heads allowed the engine to breathe effortlessly at high RPM. While competitors struggled to push past 6,200 RPM, the Hemi could stretch toward 6,800. And every extra revolution meant more horsepower, more speed, more domination. Drivers reported that their Hemi-powered cars felt like rockets, endless power. No matter how hard they pushed, the engine just kept pulling harder. When the Daytona 500 ended, the results shocked the racing world. Richard Petty didn't just win, he crushed the competition. The margin wasn't even close, and the top finishing positions were packed with Hemi-powered cars. First place, second place, third place, all Hemi. Chevrolet teams were furious. Ford teams were confused. NASCAR officials were alarmed because suddenly the racing series had a problem. The Hemi was too good. It wasn't competitive racing anymore. It was domination. And things were about to get even worse. Throughout the 1964 NASCAR season, the Ford 26 Hemi dominated. Chrysler teams won 26 races that year, 26 out of around 60 races total. Nearly half the season belonged to Chrysler. Drivers like Richard Petty and David Pearson used the engine to overwhelm the field again and again. The combination of huge airflow, sky-high compression, and bulletproof bottom-end strength made the Hemi nearly unstoppable. The block itself was incredibly strong. Thick cylinder walls, 4-bolt main bearings, a forged steel crankshaft designed to survive brutal racing conditions. At full throttle, the engine produced around 490 lb-ft of torque. That kind of torque didn't just win races, it destroyed drivetrains. Transmission gears snapped, drive shafts twisted like pretzels. Rear differentials exploded under the load. Teams had to reinforce everything just to handle the power, but the engine kept running, mile after mile, race after race, and that terrified Chevrolet because their existing big blocks simply couldn't match the Hemi's airflow advantages. Even the mighty Chevy 427 big blocks struggled to keep up. Chevy engineers studied the Hemi design. They ran their own calculations. They realized something horrifying. The hemispherical combustion chamber wasn't just a small improvement, it was a fundamental advantage: more efficient combustion, better volumetric efficiency, higher power potential. If this continued, Chrysler might completely dominate NASCAR for years, so pressure began building behind the scenes. Complaints, rule discussions, arguments. Chevrolet and Ford demanded action. They claimed the Hemi wasn't a production engine. They said Chrysler was cheating. They threatened to leave NASCAR entirely. And eventually, NASCAR made a decision that stunned the racing world. For the 1965 season, the 426 Hemi was banned. Officially, the reason was simple. NASCAR required that engines used in racing must be available in production street cars, but Chrysler had built the Hemi strictly for racing. Only a handful existed, no street version, no production run, which meant, technically, it wasn't legal. So NASCAR shut it down, just like that. And Chrysler was furious. Executives screamed at NASCAR officials. Engineers felt betrayed. They had created something extraordinary, and now it was being punished for being too good. But instead of walking away, they did something brilliant. They turned the Hemi into a street engine. If NASCAR wanted a production version, they would build one. In 1966, Chrysler released the legendary Street Hemi. This version kept the same basic architecture as the race engine: 426 cubic inches, 4.25-inch bore, 3.75-inch stroke, the same massive hemispherical heads, but the compression ratio dropped to 10.25.1 so it could run on pump gas. Instead of race carburetors, it used dual Carter AFB 4 barrels. The camshaft was milder. The timing was adjusted for street driving. The official rating? 425 horsepower. But almost everyone knew that number was conservative. Chrysler intentionally underrated the engine, partly for insurance reasons, partly to avoid scaring customers. In reality, many engines produced closer to 470 horsepower in factory trim. Some experts believe the actual number was even higher. And the torque? A monstrous 490 lb-ft. Available at just 4,000 RPM. Put that into a lightweight muscle car like a Dodge Charger or Plymouth Roadrunner, and you had something terrifying. These cars were street-legal drag racers. Quarter-mile times dropped into the low 13-second range. With slick tires and proper tuning, some cars ran 12s. A few broke into the 11-second range. In the late 1960s, that was outrageous performance. That was faster than many purpose-built race cars. But building a Hemi was expensive. The complex heads required precision machining. Every surface had to be perfect. The valve train had dozens of unique components, and assembly took far longer than a standard big block. Skilled technicians spent hours on each engine. Quality control was intense. In 1966, a street Hemi cost about $900 as an option. That's roughly the price of an entire small car at the time. You could buy a basic economy car for that money. Because of that, production numbers stayed low. Between 1966 and 1971, Chrysler built only around 11,000 street Hemi engines. Compare that to the hundreds of thousands of Chevy small blocks produced every year. This engine was rare, exotic, and legendary. Every Hemi car became an instant collector's piece. Meanwhile, NASCAR finally allowed the Hemi to return in 1966 once the street version existed. Chrysler had called their bluff, and once again, it dominated. Drivers like David Pearson and Richard Petty used Hemi power to rack up victories across the late 1960s. Its combination of airflow, torque, and reliability proved nearly unbeatable. The engine became a symbol of raw American horsepower, a statement of engineering excellence, a legend that grew with every victory. But like many legends of the muscle car era, its reign wouldn't last forever. By the early 1970s, everything was changing. Insurance companies began punishing high-performance cars with massive premiums. Young drivers couldn't afford coverage. Sales started dropping. Gas prices were rising. The 1973 oil crisis was approaching, and new emissions regulations were looming. High-compression engines like the Hemi struggled to meet new environmental standards, catalytic converters, unleaded fuel requirements, stricter exhaust rules. Production numbers dropped, demand faded, and in 1971, Chrysler quietly ended production of the original 426 Hemi. The tooling disappeared, the factories moved on, and one of the most feared engines in American racing history faded into legend. But its impact never disappeared. Today, the 426 Hemi is one of the most valuable and respected engines ever built. Original Hemi muscle cars regularly sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some rare models cross the $1 million mark. A 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible sold for over $3 million at auction because the engine represents something pure. An era when automakers were locked in a brutal horsepower war, when engineers chased power with almost reckless ambition, when rules existed to be bent, when winning meant everything, and when one engine, just one, could scare an entire industry. The 426 Hemi didn't just win races, it forced competitors to rethink everything they knew about engine design. It proved that innovation could overcome established champions. It showed that desperation could lead to brilliance, and that's why the story still matters today. Because sometimes a single idea, a hemispherical combustion chamber, and a massive 426 cubic inches of American iron can change the entire game. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most legendary engines ever built, let me know in the comments what engine story you want to hear next, and make sure to subscribe, because the next forgotten piece of automotive history might be even crazier.